بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode in our series regarding Islamic finance and the kind of contracts that are used in it. We said that the rubric under which Islamic finance operates is the statement of Allah, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا. Allah has made trade lawful and He has prohibited riba. And so trade, one translation of al-bay', and bay' is sales, and sales is a term for exchange contracts. And we mentioned various types of exchange contracts. There are different ways to categorize them. If we're looking at the subject matter of an exchange contract, you have your normal sale, which is the sale of an asset, some tangible asset. Even now, it can be an intangible asset, such as copyright or a brand name, but it has commercial value. But at the end of the day, it's still a thing. And then you have what we were talking about in our previous episode in detail, which is a lease. And that's a sale of usufruct, either of human services or the benefit to be derived from something. In that case, the owner of the thing maintains his ownership, and the leasee purchasing the benefit from it while not purchasing the object itself. And the reason that that's made lawful is because it facilitates people's meeting their needs. Sometimes you can't afford and you don't have the need for the thing itself as something that you want to always have. So either you can't afford it or you don't necessarily want to own it. So those are the two main kinds of sales with regard to subject matter. Now there's another kind of sale which is called Istisna'a, which is a manufacturing contract. It comes from the word sana'a, which means to make. And Istisna'a, whenever you have ist in front of a verb in Arabic, it means to seek that action. So istaghfara means to seek Allah's forgiveness. Astaghfirullah. You're asking Allah to forgive you. And so istisna'a means to seek the manufacturing of some good. So there's a certain similarity between istisna and salam in the sense that what you're paying for doesn't exist at the time of the contract. And because of that fact, this is considered an anomalous form of contract. And despite it being anomalous, it is considered to be lawful by consensus. Now, that refers back to, we talked about this in a previous episode with regard to the concept of need, haja, whether it is general or specific, is treated like darura, pressing necessity, in causing the relaxation of rules which are normally stringent. Now, when the need is general, what we're talking about with regard to a manufacturing contract, then the Sharia's allowance of it is for all time and for anyone who wants to make use of this permission. You don't have to demonstrate that you are in some state of unusual need. What is exactly the Sharia proof that this is lawful? Well, you don't have a specific dalil in the sense of a text that comes right out and says it. But it's a form of sale. Allah said, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا. So Allah has made sales lawful. So again, the burden of proof when it comes to the issue of the legality of exchange contracts, the burden of proof is upon the one who says it's unlawful. So this is a kind of an exchange contract, and the burden of proof is on the one who says it's unlawful. In addition to that, the argument is made that this kind of contract is a historically ancient form of contract. And it was known in Arabia at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and there is no evidence that he ever prohibited it. And because of that, there was ijma' among the Sahaba that it is a lawful form of contract, and that ijma' has never been challenged. It's something that scholars down through the ages have agreed is permissible. So that's the issue of its Sharia justification. Now, the definition of istisna'a technically is a contract to purchase something that is to be manufactured. The seller undertakes to supply it from materials he will provide according to stipulated specifications and for a stipulated price to be paid according to the terms agreed upon. So among the important features of this contract is that it's a sale contract, so once the contracting parties enter into the agreement, there's an offer and an acceptance, then that contract takes its effect. There's no need to have a new contract at the time that the manufacturing is completed, where there's another offer and acceptance. No, the offer and the acceptance have already occurred, and everything that happens is the ramifications of that contract. The contract is still in effect throughout the manufacturing process until it's done. There's no need for some new contract later. And the subject matter of istisna is anything that is going to be manufactured. So that makes it different from a Salam sale. Salam sales are contracted for things that are already there, frequently for agricultural goods and those kinds of things. So even if they don't exist, they're not being manufactured. Now, the subject matter of the Istisna'a contract is a debt liability on the part of the manufacturer. And he pledges to deliver it. Because it's not existent at the time of the contract, you have a similar requirement in Istisna'a that you also had in a Salam sale, and you also have that same requirement in a forward lease. In order to prevent disputes in these kind of contracts, you have to have specifications, rigorous specifications about what exactly is it that is going to be manufactured. So if those specifications are not precise enough, then what's going to happen as the contract unfolds? The manufacturer will deliver something, and the buyer will say, wait a minute, this isn't what I wanted. And the manufacturer will say, well, it's close enough. You didn't exactly say something other than that. So in order to preclude dispute, the item has to be specified. So now in the context, the modern context of the use of istisna, I mean, when a building is being contracted for, the manufacture of a building, then these things always involve plans. You have to call in an architect. The architect, he provides this detailed plan of exactly how that building is going to look and how all its components are composed, and then there have to be specifications about if there's electrical wire, what gauge it is, and what kind of fixtures will be used, the kind of glass. All of those things have to be specified. Another thing that sets aside an istisna contract is that the manufacturer here is providing the materials. So that's different. This is what makes an istisna contract different from an ijara contract. In an ijara contract, the seeker of the service is providing the material. He brings, let's say, his cloth to the tailor and says, "Here, make me a shirt." Now, the tailor may provide thread and buttons, but the basic material is provided by the customer. We're going to take a break here and come back soon, inshallah. Welcome back. So we're talking about the particular characteristics of an istisna contract. And we said that one of the things that sets an istisna manufacturing contract apart from an ijara contract is that in ijara, the person who's providing the labor is not providing the materials that will be used. That's provided by the customer. And in istisna, it is the manufacturer himself who's providing the materials. And therefore, the cost of those things would be factored into the price that he's demanding from the customer. Now, with regard to the amount of labor or materials involved in a contract, in an ijara contract, the labor represents the subject matter of the contract, and there may be some trivial kinds of materials involved which are supplied by the service provider. Like we mentioned, in a tailoring contract, the tailor would provide the thread and the buttons, but that's an insignificant amount of the materials that are involved in the finished product. And because it's insignificant, then if you recall the maxim that we dealt with in an earlier episode, that consideration is given to what is predominant and widespread, not to that which is rare or trivial, minor in its quantity. So, on the other hand, you could have a sale which involves some labor, like you buy a washing machine and they deliver it and then they install it for you, they set it up. So the labor involved here represents a fairly trivial percent of what it is that you're purchasing, so it remains a sale contract. It's not istisna. In istisna, the labor content is significant and the material content is also significant. Those two things, and they're both significant, that turns it into an istisna contract. And what that also does is it affects certain rules, like in ijara, the labor has to be very specifically known and the price has to be specifically known. So, for instance, when somebody's working for another person as an employee, you know that you have to work X number of hours a day for X number of days a week, and that you're paid either by the hour, or you're paid by the week, or you're paid by the month. So the labor is very specific. In an istisna contract, you know, the amount of labor involved doesn't have to be specified, because what the focus is, the specification is on that finished product. Another issue that separates an istisna contract from a salam contract is that the price can be paid at any time. In a salam contract, the price must be paid in the contract session, and delivery of the good is later. Now, the delivery of the good in istisna is also later, but it's not a salam contract, and we don't have a text requiring payment up front. We have the practice of the Sahaba and the fact that the Prophet ﷺ didn't prohibit istisna as the main Sharia evidence for its legality, and we don't have any Sharia text requiring payment up front. So, because in the absence of requirement, the asl is, the standard rule is that there are no obligations except by specific communication from the lawgiver, then payment can be made at any time in a manufacturing contract. So the specification with regard to the payment is that you can't just leave it unknown. Okay? This is when payment will be made. You have to fix the date. And normally what happens, especially in large projects, is that payment will be staged in accord with the completion of well-defined stages of the manufacturing process. So these kinds of deals tend to involve a lot of money. So the customer wants to make sure that the work is being done properly. So at stage number 1, when that's finished, an inspection is made, and when the customer is satisfied that yes, what we've agreed upon has been done, then payment is released. Now, with regard to Islamic finance, the role of a bank in an Istisna'a project or an Istisna'a contract can be either as the customer or as the contractor. And what that ends up turning into in some cases is what's called a parallel Istisna'a contract, where a customer comes to the bank and wants some project manufactured, and the bank agrees to deliver that project to the customer. And then the bank turns around and subcontracts the job out to some kind of a builder, because banks are not in the business of making they're not in the business of making things, you know. They're financial institutions. If a bank is the customer in a manufacturing contract, it could be in a situation where a customer has come to them and wants a product, and then that's when they agree that they will sell this completed product to the customer. They don't enter into an Istisna'a contract with the customer in this kind of a situation. They enter into a Murabaha contract. So at the time of the contract, the customer is only promising to buy. And that may be kind of unattractive to a bank because they want it to be, I mean, that promise is legally binding according to the fiqh academies, but there's always the possibility of reneging, even if there's a legal responsibility. Another situation in which a bank could be the customer is where a manufacturer wants to build something and they need funds, and they come to the bank, and the bank then says, okay, I'll be the customer in this contract. And when it's finished, the bank would then appoint the manufacturer to seek a buyer. And these are two separate contracts. When the contract of manufacturing is completed, the bank pays the manufacturer. Then this new role is undertaken by the manufacturer. It looks for a buyer. And when it finds one, then the bank would sell to the buyer and pay the manufacturer an agent's fee for having done this job on behalf of the bank. Now, one of the things about these kind of contracts where the bank is the manufacturer in one contract and the seeker of manufacturing in the second contract, which is called parallel Istisna'a, you now have two contracts. One of the recurring features of these kinds of arrangements, the Sharia scholars stress, is that there should be no linkage between the two contracts. Each contract is a separate and independent contract. And this is because of this hadith, which is narrated by a number of Sahaba, where the Prophet ﷺ prohibited two sales in one sale, or two contracts in one contract. And in order to comply with that hadith, that's why these contracts are kept separated. Now, the reason for that prohibition is that human beings are endlessly creative. And unfortunately, one of the ways in which human creativity finds its outlet is to get around rules. So when there's a prohibition of riba, one of the ways to get around it is by combining a sale and a loan, or various kinds of contract arrangements where you have two contracts put together in a way that somehow turns into riba. And so the Prophet ﷺ prohibited combining contracts in a way that will result in that. Come to the end of this episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahu a'lam.